Hey everyone, welcome. Excited to have you, even you in the back. Hey, so in case you didn't see, I sent out an email today. We just got our 1,000th member of AngularJS Utah. Woo! I think that is freaking awesome. 1,000? Are you 1,001? Why not? So that's awesome, and we have a prize for the 1,000th member, if he is here tonight. But my mind totally just went blank on his name. Thank you. I saw him earlier today. So Jordan Ray? Is that his name, Jordan? Jordan Ray. He's not here? All right. So tonight we've got two presenters. Claron Twitchell is going to present on beginning with Angular. We've had a lot of interest recently with people wanting to start doing Angular. Who's here for the first time? Look at that, that's awesome. We're glad you're here. And this is an awesome place to come learn and also to meet people. And so yeah, we're really glad you're here. So I'll turn it over to Claron, and after him we've got Dmitry, and I don't know how to say your last name. Dmitry, period. And he's going to present as well. And then after that, don't leave quite yet, because we have a raffle of Front-End Masters, free year subscription for Front-End Masters. So I'll turn it over to Claron. Oh, sorry. Thank you very, very much to Workfront for this awesome food. I think this is so much better than pizza. And so, round of applause to Workfront. And also to Adobe for the space. It's really hard to find big places like this, and Adobe's been awesome at letting us come every time. So applause for Adobe too. Thanks. To announce Beth, apparently. Bathrooms are down this hall right here. All the way down, you'll see glass cage that has a screen.
Wow, I'm so impressed with so many new people. I was thinking that there's no way there's going to be any new people at the beginning of this, because they don't know that, like, the traffic is ridiculous here, and you think you're out in the middle of the country and there's all these cars. So this evening, the talk is just for people who are just barely starting out with Angular, and maybe you're a big data guy and you thought you'd peek around the corner and see what's going on up front or something. And so that's what tonight is for. I posted on our meetup page. The plug that I'm going to give now is I'm a co-organizer with OpenStack Utah, and so it's kind of this thing you don't see too much, like you know Angular's up front and the cloud's in back, but it's really hot right now. So follow the link, come join us. You'll like it. Myself, I'm a developer for many years. Right now, I'm in the middle of starting a software development shop. So if you'd like to talk about that afterwards, please do. Let's have a conversation. And here's my contact information. I'll show that again at the end. So, okay, so this is just your basic HTML. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually write a little bit of HTML right here. And we're going to take this, and what we're going to do is we're going to write a little bit of Angular, and then we're going to compare that to how you would do the same thing in JavaScript. And then we're gonna use the Angular tutorial right off the AngularJS.org page, and I'm going to show you how I use that to learn Angular, and also how I use the Angular seed. So all that stuff, I posted the links. So what I expect here is that I've got live syntax checkers. So if something is not right, let me know. What's that? Okay. And so we'll do a body here. And then we're going to do just some real basic HTML and do an HTML hello world. We're going to do this. We're going to call this one Hello John. And so I didn't hear any of my syntax checkers shout out yet, so maybe I've got it right. Okay, so that is HTML. Now, maybe you'd like to do something just a little bit more interesting. So we're going to do some work this gradually into Angular. And so we're going to do input. Okay, so this is the first bit of Angular you're going to see. And we're going to do something with this John down here to make that a little more dynamic. And so curly braces you see all the time in Angular. Okay. Now, amazingly enough, this is not working yet. Okay, just see if the old guys, experienced people, are still awake. So we're going to do, okay, we're going to bootstrap him. So now listen to what he said, because this is really important. We're going to get to this in a minute. And since save myself having to type this entire thing, I just saved it. We have an environment where Angular's already been downloaded. So just save myself some pain. Okay, now this is again not going to work. I'm just going to show you that it's not going to work because it's always fun to see things that don't work. Okay, up here we have a input box, and nothing works yet. That's great. Good news. So back over here said we got to bootstrap it first, and so this is actually this is important. There's a lot going on when you do a couple of these lines. Okay, so now we got a little Angular going here. Now, let's go back, and you saw the okay, full screen. Okay, so this was the HTML. Now, the Angular looks something like this that I just typed in. And back here is if you're going to do this in Java, if you had the jQuery library and you were doing this in JavaScript, you can see it's a little bit more involved. You got to manipulate the DOM. You got to have some things going on where you're watching what's happening on, so you know when to update the DOM and so on and so forth. And so you got to manually put that in. Now, don't get me wrong. We actually will use a little jQuery as we go on with the demo tonight. But Angular is dynamic HTML. Now, I'm going to go to the Angular tutorial. And this first page, if you go, so this is just docs.angularjs.org. And if you go to this first page, and it starts talking about, you know, what's going on here, and what the code is doing. And so the bootstrap idea right here, this ng app tells the Angular JavaScript that we loaded in to look through and compile the DOM so that all this magic can happen. And so step 0 is pretty much what we just did live. And if you've been involved with other types of web development environments, I'm a little bit familiar with Ruby on Rails, and they use MVC as a common term, so model view controller. And basically, the view is in our HTML files. And so that's the first view. Angular has done, the team has done a nice little job of having this all set up for us. So if you read the tutorial, if you're an experienced front-end developer, you can read through all 12 steps in about an hour or two, they say. And if you want to dive into it a little more deeply, a day. But if you really want to learn it, it's going to take longer than that. So, and this shows us from step 1 to step 0 to step 1 what was changed in the code. Goes up to GitHub, and we can see how the code changed from one to the other. They do a little, small amount of CSS, and they show us how the index.html page changed. Here's the Angular reference that we did, script we brought in, and they bring in Twitter Bootstrap, and it shows us, what's going on. So now when you get all the way to the bottom of the tutorial, and I think I'm going to skip through a whole bunch of the tutorial because like 30 minutes and we got started a little late. But when you get to the bottom of the tutorial, it says, okay, now you've gone through this and you kind of know what's going on. When you're actually ready to start developing, then go to Angular Seed and clone that from GitHub and go to work on that. There's a couple of things going on that the experienced developers will, they kind of turn their nose up at this because it's actually a couple of years old. The tutorial, Angular Seed, and it's not the current best practices. I'll show you some slides at the end of where to go to look for that. But you want to be aware that some of the things are not current anymore. So I think I'm going to go back to maybe just enough time to go back to the tutorial just a little bit. So the idea being views and templates. So with model view and controller, controller is what manipulates and communicates back and forth between your data and the view that's going to be expressed in the HTML files. So I kind of think of view as being your HTML files. The controllers are going to be in some JavaScript files, and the model is the data. And so right there at the beginning, where we type something in, there's a that's the data that's being changed, and that's the model being changed. And Angular is doing some clever stuff in the background. So you can see that they're referencing here a controller, and this is actually like not the latest and greatest way to do this, but it still gives the right idea. To start out with, there's just one controller. This app is a list of phones, and the controller is displaying those phones. Right here we have the first controller, and in the controller.js file, and they've just hard copied the data in there in JSON format, and so it's just going to pull it right out of that file. Now this could be like over an API over the internet, or it could be from a database, it could be from your big data, whatever, Hadoop or whatever you got going, your MySQL. Right now they just hard-coded that. They do a lot with tests, and we're not going to have time to show too much on that. But over here, I've got a server running. And so my local host, and so there's some tests going on so far. And every time you change a file, it's going to run those tests for you. The karma is going to run the test for you, and 5 of 5 down here at the bottom are success. And so that's kind of fun to use. There's an end-to-end test. And I don't know if we'll show that or not. But they're going to do some end-to-end testing too. Okay. So when I got all done with this through the tutorial, I thought, okay, I actually went through it, I don't know, 2 or 3 times, and did a lot of there's little experiments you can do at the end of each step and kind of get a better feel of what's going on. So I thought, and I read that part at the bottom. It says, okay, when you're really ready to start developing your own apps, use the Angular Seed. and work on that to do your own apps. So I'm going to jump right here to the end and pull up the live demo. So this is the idea. When they finish the Angular tutorial, you can sort these things, so it's an interactive. They put some. You get a chance to do some animation. They show you how to do that. That's kind of fun. And so when I go back between newest and alphabetical, you see the animation, and then I'll click on the link, and there's more detail on the phones, and there's some animation going on there. So all those things you get to learn by going through the tutorial. You'll be an expert in all this when you get done. But so I wanted to kind of get it straight in my own head. So what I decided to do, this is what, when you first bring up the little box, is when you first bring up the tutorial, if you've cloned it and you go through the steps to get it actually running on your local host. And that's what it looks like compared to the tutorial app that's got more going on. So what I started to do is I started to change this into my own thing. And so you start to learn stuff. So I wanted to have the tutorial PhoneCat app running in one browser window, and I wanted to have what I was doing running in another one. And so, hey, I got to get into this package.json and change it to 8001 so that there's not a conflict. So bingo, I'm starting to learn stuff. Then I, gave you a good opportunity to experiment around. The PhoneCat app is that's with the tutorial that when you clone it, they give you all the pictures of these little phones they're showing and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, what if I just pulled that from over the internet, pulled a picture, and so that right in the middle of the screen there is a reference to a URL for a picture it's one of my pictures, and actually down there at the bottom, well, up in the middle too. So anyway, so okay, well that's a good experiment. And then I started, going through the files and just changing it from the names they use to names that make sense for myself. And all you programmers, cut and paste is, the best way to compliment people is you just use what they did. So this is my app was called the Campsite app, and so this is very Angular-ish. Here's a directive called ngrepeat, so you can loop through lists of data, and you can pull out what you want to do, what you want to display. And there's quite a bit of CSS going on. So the tutorial, the Angular tutorial, will introduce you to the concept of having multiple views. And this is what I'm having here. The seed actually comes up with multiple views right from the beginning. And so I'm dealing with this. It's a good opportunity to get familiar with JSON if you're not familiar with that a lot. So I built my own data set here, JSON, specific to what I wanted my app to look like. And then we use some, the animation you saw is actually jQuery. And so you get a chance to look at a little jQuery as well as when you're doing the tutorial. And since this is all on GitHub, it's a good opportunity to, if your Git is not quite up to snuff, it's a good opportunity to get some more experience with Git and GitHub. And you get keeping the tests that they show in the tutorial as I was doing this. That was interesting. Try to keep the tests updated. I didn't have success all the time, which is good when you're testing. So let's see. If we are lucky, I should have an example, right? Okay, so this is my finished app. In the summer of 2013, I walked from Salt Lake City to Jackson County, Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. And so I thought, I got all these pictures. I'll just use this for the app instead of the phones. And so you can see that the animation works. And the view, you can go from one view to another. The sorting works. I can sort here by state or alphabetically. And so, does anybody know where Woodland, Utah is? Okay. So I slept there one night, and this is, so the animation is kind of the cool stuff here, but that's actually jQuery. And so one of the nice things you'll learn about Angular is it works nicely with a lot of the other JavaScript-based tools. And if you really a wide traveler in the western United States, you will, of course, know where Dinosaur, Colorado is. And so that all works. Okay, I think I got 2 minutes. Any questions? Oh, I got there the 82nd day. Opportunity camping along the way. So it's kind of fun to have, take something like, I enjoyed this, just kind of, it helps me to learn if I make it fun, make it kind of personal to me as I'm doing the tutorial and transforming it and seeing how it all works and how you have to change seed to the tutorial. Any other questions? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I actually do. So let me get back up to full screen. Okay, so in the link to my slides, you'll see some other resources. And this one right here, the Angular Style Guide, this guy, John Papa, spoke at the NG Conf here a couple of months ago. And so he was kind of featured speaker on what the current best practices are. And so that his style guide is a good place to go. There's a bunch of other stuff on Angular AngularJS.org for learning. And I have links here to my slides. And of course, all the learning sites usually have an AngularJS tract, such as an Egghead.io is a good place. And yeah, go to this for a bunch of links.
Right, test, test. All right. All right, should we start? Okay, there's been a technical issue. Turned out that this presenter deck is not Linux friendly because it uses some outdated technologies that I'm not going to name. But anyway, quick question before I start. I know there's a lot of new people here. How many of you are actually familiar with Angular? Okay, good. You probably know more than I do about Angular. Just a quick disclaimer, my talk will be high level. So if you already know Angular well, just receive my talk as these are the things that I like about Angular, and this is how we build an app with Angular. Okay, so my name is Dmitry. I live on the internet. Got my address right there. I love all things web. I love web apps. I love having or making great user experience. And I work for Lucid Software. So we are the makers of Lucidchart and Lucidpress. Lucidchart is a diagramming application in the cloud. Flowcharts, BPMN, entity relationship diagrams, mockups, what else? Floor plans. Anything that involves creating lines and blocks and other shapes, we have that. And Lucidpress is our new product built on the same platform, but it's aimed more towards digital and print publications, magazines, flyers, booklets, reports, online or offline. Now, both products have great collaboration features. You can share your documents with your teammates. You can even collaborate on one document in real time with any number of people, pretty much how you're used to doing it in Google Docs and similar products. And of course, with team collaboration comes team management. In each organization using a cloud product, there would be an administrator or even several administrators if it's a big organization that manage the subscription, handle billing, allocate licenses, assign roles to different users. And of course, our app has this. Now, the problem is we've grown so fast. We got so many customers asking for features, especially enterprises that get on board. They always want something special. They always want a better way to integrate your cloud with their existing IT infrastructure. So as we kept satisfying these user requests, we kept our team administration app kept growing and growing. We kept adding features. Now, look at the screenshot. You see all these options. The screenshot doesn't even fit in one screen because we just kept adding settings that some of them were originally custom built for one or two customers, but then they found value among the broader circle of users. Somebody asked for SAML. We added a new SAML screen. That's kind of its own separate thing. Yeah, you have to manage your license requests in a different place. So in the end, our existing UI and code infrastructure, front-end code infrastructure, just didn't scale enough to accommodate the ever-growing functionality. There were multiple places where you manage different account features. It didn't feel like one single cohesive app. And there were some performance problems as well. Perhaps our biggest customer has around 15,000 users on their account. And so one day their admin tried to go ahead and manage their user list. They tried pulling up the user list page, and they couldn't get it finished loading because it was too slow. Both the back end and the front end were too slow to accommodate that amount of records. So we decided to just build a new app from scratch, redesign it. Our design team came up with some great solutions to make the whole experience feel nicer, more cohesive, more power features, more bulk editing functionality. And we decided to use Angular to build that new app. So first question, why did we decide to use Angular? Well, my first answer is we didn't think too much about it. Now, that said, of course, we wouldn't just pick some pet project of some developer. We did know that Angular, just like a number of other MVC frameworks, it's a recent project. It's widely used in real world. It's got enough community around it. It's got enough support around it. It's proven to make things work. So, of course, that was the primary reason. It's actively maintained. And it does support certain modern web app building principles that I'm going to cover further in the talk. And also, yeah, important thing, we knew that people made it work with Google Closure Compiler, which we have already been using for our front-end code. So that was important for us. Now, what is Angular? I found this definition that I really like. It's a new, powerful client-side technology. I'm not going to read the rest of the definition, but the keywords here are it embraces and extends HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The previous speaker that was here on the stage kind of showed you a hello world HTML page that he just dropped in, and then he was able to quickly add some curly braces here and there and turn it into magic. And the point being here, Angular doesn't try to offer something on its own, something different from existing open web technology stack. It tries to instead build upon the existing technologies, and that's great. So it tries to be an evolution of existing web standards. Now, I'm going to cover at a high level the biggest features that I think are most important about Angular and the things that Angular offers and how we use it in our app. So first of all, you've already heard that term. Angular does support the MVC pattern, or some people prefer to get into the detail and say that it's actually model view view model. Well, actually, the maintainers of Angular itself prefer to just call it model view whatever. It doesn't matter that much. Whatever you call it, essentially you have your model that manages your application state, your view that visualizes that state on the screen, and then whatever glue you need to implement to manage all the transitions and to make the model talk to the view without the two depending on each other too much. So model view whatever. Second, HTML templates. I'm going to get to it again. The important part here is, again, HTML is an existing technology. A lot of you know this. It's not some other custom-built templating language. The reason important is that, as you've seen, you can have an existing HTML page, or maybe your designer will hand you over an HTML markup from a template that they came up, and you can just drop it into the project. Save it under the HTML extension, and it's going to be in your app. You don't have to convert it to some other templating language that may even be better for some things. So that's why it's easy to author and collaborate, because you're already familiar with it, because it's an extension of an existing standard. And Angular, with its HTML templates and its directive system, it does support this fairly recent web components ideology. So yeah, just a little snippet of a typical HTML template in Angular. This is valid HTML. Nothing here that's not HTML, just elements and attributes. Of course, Angular interprets them in a certain way to make all that work, but it's HTML, and you can start with vanilla HTML and you can change the things in your template as you go and make them dynamic. Two-way data binding. I'm not actually going to demo that example, but you've just seen it. That classic example with an input field and a paragraph of text, and they're kind of synced together. What I'd like to stress here is that you don't have to write any JavaScript to make that work. You don't have to write JavaScript to read from an input field. You don't have to write JavaScript to output a certain value stored in the memory into your template. They just work together. Now, that going back to that model view whatever diagram, model and the view, they're connected on the diagram, and there's a two-way connection there. That two-way arrow is intentional. Not only the view can render the model, whatever's stored in the model, but the view can also send data back into the model without you having to write any JavaScript code, and that's great. Now, routing. I hope that all of you building web apps today will consider implementing deep linking into your app, since you're probably making a one-page app that the browser doesn't ever navigate from page to page, but that doesn't mean that internal navigation and internal linking is unimportant. There has to be a way for each view in your app to have a link, to be accessible via link, so that I can refresh a page, or I can send a link over to somebody, I can bookmark it, and it'll point to the right place in my possibly large app. So Angular supports that out of the box, and all we have to do to tell Angular which URLs map to which templates is by defining a simple JavaScript construct that defines that mapping. What's also great about deep linking is that it also eliminates a lot of code that you would otherwise write for this internal navigation in your app. Like this little screenshot with a user list and a new user button on top of it. That button is just a link, just a hyperlink. There's no JavaScript handler that handles clicking that button, which means, again, you don't write excessive code. It's automatically accessible. It's browser and web technology friendly. Lastly, dependency injection. That's another modern, not necessarily web app, just modern app building principles. No matter what platform you're at, you should have something like that. What this does is the system allows you to define an object that you'll probably reuse in different places in your app. You define it, you tell the framework that here's my object, register it under this name. My example has it under the name account service. And then in any other place in your app, you just say that you need an account service. And in case of Angular, you don't even do it that explicitly. You just list it as a function argument. And then Angular automatically parses the function body as a string and tries to figure out this argument and sees if there are services or factories registered under these names. So again, it just works. Dependency injection handles component discovery and import. Another important thing that dependency injection does to your project is it discourages the use of globals. You don't just make a global variable and put a singleton on there. You do it through the framework, and this means that these dependencies are easy to switch out, which makes for loosely coupled modules and make your modules easier to test. Because in test code, you can easily substitute a real component dependency for a mock one without having to deal with the global namespace. So just a recap of the five highlight things that I think Angular is about. There's more, but I think these are the biggest ones. Now, I'm going to talk also about what Angular doesn't give us and what do you most likely have to build in order to ship an app to get it beyond just a demo or a prototype. Because many of you, when looking at a framework, you wonder, well, I've heard a lot about this framework. I've seen the presentation, I've seen the demo, I heard about the cool things it offers, dependency injection, MVC, but what's actually in the box and what do you have to provide yourself? So I'm going to talk about that. First, code architecture. Angular makes no assumptions about your code architecture. It doesn't tell you how to architect your code. It doesn't tell you how to name your files. That's all up to you. So, which means that any existing code architecting practices you have, you just bring them to the table, and Angular doesn't get into the way. We weren't very original here. We just put all the controllers in the controller directory, all the models in the model directory, etc. And yeah, we have some subdirectories for views because there are more templates than actual code. Second thing is code loading. For demo purposes, you could even write your entire little app in index.html and call it a day. Of course, when you want to ship a real-world app, you typically want all your JavaScript concatenated and minified and obfuscated, and just include it as one or maybe two script tags to your in your production environment. Whereas in development, you do want to have multiple files loaded, which facilitates debugging. So Angular doesn't provide any tool chain around that. Again, you have to bring your own. We have already been using Google Closure Compiler, which I mentioned. So for us, Google Closure Compiler handles that. Second thing, data models. The word model appears in Angular source code and documentation several times. However, again, Angular doesn't really tell you how to write your models. Angular doesn't come with a built-in data package like some other frameworks do. What model is for Angular, it's essentially a property a template has to look up on an object. That's the farthest that Angular would define a model. But of course, in your application, you probably work with some data. You probably save it on the server, and you probably have or want to have objects that represent your entities that you work with. Again, we tried not to over-engineer it. We just made simple, plain old JavaScript constructors with prototypes on them with several useful functions. Nothing fancy here. We didn't use an existing data package that some third parties provide. Server communication. All that's inside Angular is basically an AJAX function, kind of like the one jQuery has. That's all that Angular gives you. Again, there's no built-in REST client or WebSocket client or local storage client. There's no fixed way of interacting with your backend. Your app may not even have a backend, but if it does, you'll probably end up implementing your own little wrapper around around the way your servers are built in order to talk to them. So our backends actually use what's called Hypermedia API, which helps not have a bunch of REST URLs hard-coded in the client app. Instead, the client app receives what's called a bootstrap URL. In this case, it's an account with some metadata on it. And this bootstrap resources contains links to all the other interesting objects that our app would manipulate. So we get an account, it has a name, it has an owner, but it also has a link to the collection of users. It has a link to the collection of groups or roles or some other collections. And then the simple client that we wrote to traverse that structure is pretty much a lightweight wrapper around just standard HTTP methods. So if on the right is a typical snippet that you can find in our front-end code. We get our account, and then if you want to get all the user on the account, we just do account.users.get, and it very closely mimics the ideology behind HTTP itself. Or if you want to change something, say assign a role to a user, you would just do user record.user roles post, and it'll map to a HTTP post request. So something like that you would have to implement yourself. Lastly, UI components. All Angular offers you is an HTML templating language. You can use vanilla HTML, or if you want nice looking fancy widgets, again, you have to bring your own. You can use one of the many UI libraries offered by other developers. We decided to roll our own because we didn't have a lot of complex widgets in our front-end app. However, we did have some existing CSS from our main app that we reused, and also we had to make sure that our components that manipulate data in them work with a Google Closure compiler in advanced compilation mode where variables get renamed and stuff. So that's one of the reasons we didn't use something like Bootstrap, because it would take more effort to make it work with Closure compiler. So that's just a high-level overview. I highlighted 5 things that are in Angular and 5 things you are most likely to have to implement if you actually want to ship your app to production to potentially many users. A few takeaways I'd like to share. So many of you that came here probably have this question: should I use Angular? Well, you probably should. And I listed some of the reasons here. There's no reason not to. It's a stable project. There's community around it. There's no problem getting help if you're stuck. It does support modern web app building principles. I have to know that it's not a monolithic framework, nothing like XJS or Dojo toolkit. It's very minimalistic, but it also means that it has a very lean learning curve, and it doesn't make you learn the abstractions that you might not need during your first months of development. Maybe it really lets you start small, and we appreciated that. Do consider your current stack. Angular is pretty much technology agnostic. However, there are other projects like Ember.js or Meteor that may work better with your existing backend. Now, another big question, so how do I make a big app? Well, you don't. Instead, you make little modules and you develop them separately. In case of an app, a big module would be a screen, so say a user list screen, a settings screen, an app integration screen. Just think of them as separate small apps and just refactor the code. That's another thing that we learned. We started with just dropping an HTML mockup into the project and then replacing things here and there to make them dynamic. Don't be afraid to write spaghetti code in the beginning. Just refactor the code as you go. Lastly, try to release parts of your giant new enterprise app gradually. Don't wait 6 months until you've shipped something that people don't like. That's one of the early screenshots here. So our first release came with just the user list, and other administration features were disabled, and we redirected people to the old app while we're working on them. So do make sure you get early feedback from your users. Now, bonus question, how do I make it fast? Well, good news is that it probably already is. If it's not, Angular may not be the one to blame. Identify the bottleneck, don't do premature optimization. Some people say, well, Angular is slow, it's dirty checking, there's no way you can manage watching a bunch of objects and still perform well. On practice, this is often not true. In fact, one of the bottlenecks that we had with our new Angular app, it was in the transport layer. We tried loading that same big account with 15,000 users in Angular, and well, initially it was faster. It still took maybe 30 seconds to load. And so when we started looking into the issue, it wasn't actually the front-end code that rendered the list of users that was slow. It was simply the server not sending down the user list in gzip. As soon as we turned out gzip encoding, the loading performance improved like 10 times. So yeah, the problem may not be inside Angular. Just don't rush to over-optimize the things that are fast already. That's the end of my talk. I'm happy to answer your questions. Check us out at golucid.co, and also the link to the presentation is on the screen, and I'll probably post it in the comments to the meetup. Questions? Yes? Have I ever used React? No, I haven't personally used React. I've heard about it. I think it's one of those modern web app, front-end web app frameworks that you may look into. Yes? Can you say it again? We had a little issue where we tried to write an interceptor for the router that checks if you're currently logged in and kicks you to the login page if not. I don't remember how exactly we resolved it, probably by going to Stack Overflow. Yeah, I can't name any major problem that got us stuck for a week. Any other questions, comments? Your favorite or least favorite things about Angular you want to share? Yep. So the question is about security-related question about sending a lot of data in the client and the client having a hold of it. And what was the last part? How do we keep people from sniffing around the data? We do not. I don't think that security is a good approach. I mean, you need credentials to data, but once you got it, I don't see a problem with this. If somebody could log into the app and get some data on the screen, and instead, with the Hypermedia API, they can get the same data in JSON format, which is potentially more useful for program processing. Even if somebody wanted to parse HTML, they could and extract all the data. So you just want to make sure your backend is doing it right. Right, so we already have an infrastructure and an authentication layer on our backend, and the app just sends security tokens together with each HTTP request. Yep. Yes. Yeah, and the token typically expires, and you can control that. Anyone else? Yes. So we had so the question is about Angular 2.0 and what are the thoughts here? Yeah, we had a little discussion around that. In the end, we came to the conclusion that we're just gonna go with Angular 1. It's widely supported. It's perhaps more stable, or it used to be a quarter ago. We weren't too concerned about the framework being deprecated because we knew it would be up and supported and maintained for at least several years. And at that point, in 3 or 4 years, we might need to rewrite our app anyway. We're just trying to take the agile approach here. Okay, I think we're out of time. Thanks, everyone.